Part 2, Chapter 13. There's a big kirtan guy up on the third floor. Jiva, a recent Gurukul graduate, told Gopal Das, a new arrival from Bhaktivedanta Manor in England. Everyone is crazy about him. Because of Aindra's unusual appearance and fiery demeanor, some of the Gurukul boys were afraid of him, at least until they got to know him better. But one spring, the eldest boys, who had experienced both his kirtan and his more affectionate side, invited him to an end-of-year evening program. Several of them were graduating, and they personally requested him to come down and do kirtan with them before they left. When Aindra arrived in the Gurukul garden, the first time he had come into the school to do a program, the students spontaneously all stood up and gave him a long ovation. He was touched by their welcome, had the older boys play mridanga, and included everyone. Quote, "Throw out everything else you've learned," he told the group. "The only thing you have to learn in life, you have: chanting the holy name in Vrindavan." Gopal had been only 8 when he'd first seen Aindra 10 years before, a year after his father, Ridha, had met Aindra in London, but he'd been mesmerized by his singing. "I've never heard anything like this," he thought, and the devotee's singing had struck a chord deep inside him. Quote, "What attracted me to his kirtan," Gopal later remembered, "was that his chanting felt really pure. When I heard his kirtan, it really touched my heart. Even at that age, I felt a heart-moving experience." After the kirtan had been going on for a while, Aindra had leaned toward one of the other kirtan members and said, "I've got to give my voice a break. You take over." When he'd seen Gopal's father, he'd broken into a big smile. It was Ridha, the travel agent with the voucher from London. Aindra had been thrilled to see him, and with his back to Gopal, he'd put down his mridanga, turned to Ridha, and became absorbed in conversation. Gopal had learned how to play 1 or 2 simple drum beats. The mridanga had been just lying there on its side, and the devotee, he'd thought, would be happy to have someone playing. So he had reached forward, taken hold of the strap, and gently tugged the drum to where he was sitting on the courtyard steps. As he'd been speaking, from the corner of his eye, Aindra had seen the mridanga rolling toward the steps. He lunged for it and found young Gopal pulling it by the strap. "What are you doing?" Aindra had admonished. Gopal had frozen. "You gotta be more careful, or you'll break it." "Gopal," his father had chastised, "why are you touching people's things?" Gopal had burst into tears. "Anyway, Prabhu," Aindra had said to Ridha as he'd placed the mridanga back on his lap, "I have to get back to my service. It's great to see you." Gopal hadn't realized that he had just met the devotee his father had heard chanting in London the year before. And now, 10 years after that, he didn't realize that Aindra was the kirtan devotee on the 3rd floor. Jiva was helping Gopal develop his mridanga skills, and the two would sit and play together for hours. That's what they were doing on the first day of Kartik when Niranjana Swami came into the temple room to sing the Damodarastika prayers. As the kirtan shifted into the Mahamantra, some of the devotees began to dance, including one who Gopal thought looked unusual. He had a stubbly beard, unkempt hair, and razor-sharp eyes, and was leaping around in thick woolen socks with a childlike smile on his face. "Whoa," Gopal exclaimed. "That's the dude, the one who freaked me out when I was a kid. That's him." And he realized it was probably the kirtan guy from the 3rd floor. Carried away by the kirtan and enthused by the devotees dancing, Gopal put the mridanga aside and stood up to play wampers, imitating the way he'd seen devotees strike their edges against each other in complex beats. But no sooner had he begun than the kirtan devotee came over, leaned into Gopal, gestured toward the wampers, and said, "That's a no-no, kid." Gopal softened his playing, brushing the wampers' flat surfaces against each other, but after a few minutes, when he thought the devotee wasn't watching anymore, he started playing them on their edges again. As soon as he resumed, the devotee came back. "You'll crack them if you keep doing that," he warned. One day soon thereafter, Gopal glanced up toward the third floor of the Gurukul building and saw smoke pouring from one of the rooms. He ran up and looked inside, but he couldn't see anything through the smoke. "Hari Bol," he shouted. "Is everything all right? Is there a fire?" "That's the problem," a voice called out. "There's no fire." Gopal was confused. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right?" "Wrong. There's no fire here, just smoke." "Should I do something?" Gopal asked. "Yes," the voice replied. "Help me get all this damn smoke out of the room." Gopal began swinging the door open and shut, but whatever was causing the smoke was creating it faster than he could get it out. "Nothing's working," he shouted. "I know. Just forget it. We're going to have to wait for the smoke to clear at its own pace." Who would ever stay in the room? Gopal wondered. He ventured in, keeping close to the floor, his eyes burning, but he couldn't see through the smoke. "Who are you?" the voice asked. "Gopal," he replied, and as the smoke cleared, he began to discern the form of the speaker. Then he recognized the unusual clothes and piercing eyes, now bright red and pouring tears. It was him, the wild kirtan guy. "I'm Aindra." Behind him, the fuel in the iron stove wouldn't catch fire, and it was spewing out a fountain of smoke. "Why don't you get out?" Gopal asked. "Why are you just sitting here in all this smoke?" "Look how many deities I have," Aindra said. "I can't take them all out, and if they have to tolerate the smoke, how can I leave?" He stood up and turned to the trays of Shilas behind him. "Come back in the evening after the Gaur-arti Kirtan. Have prasadam with us." When Gopal returned that evening, the room was filled with devotees seated on the floor, listening to Ram Roy reading from the Krishna book. A curtain hid the altar, but from the sounds and smells and the legs beneath the curtain, Gopal could tell that Aindra was behind it, making an offering. The room seemed to be from another era, another realm, its floor of packed clay and dung, its walls decorated with gobar reliefs of trees, vines, flowers, honeycombs, and bees. Its ceiling sky blue, quote, "the sky," Aindra described, of Goloka. Near the door, a pot of khichdi sat on a small wood stove. A warped, wrinkled painting of Radha and Krishna extended from the floor to the ceiling, surrounded by an ornate frame. Musical instruments were scattered amidst piles of books. There was a bare, stripped tree trunk reaching up toward the ceiling, scraps of cloth hanging from the stumps of its truncated branches. Gopal found a place to sit and turned his attention to the reading. Quote, "Krishna was very expert in playing the flute," Ram Roy read, and the gopis were captivated by the sound vibration, which was attractive not only to them, but to all living creatures who heard it. One of the gopis told her friends, "The highest perfection of the eyes is to see Krishna and Balaram enter the forest and playing their flutes and tending the cows with their friends." Aindra stuck his head out from behind the curtains just long enough to add, quote, "And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments that the gopis mean to say, 'My dear friend, if you simply remain shackled to your mundane family life, what will your eyes ever get to see? Lord Brahma has given us eyes, so let us satisfy our eyes by looking upon the most wonderful thing there is to see.'" Krishna. After a while, he emerged from the altar and began serving out prasadam. Ram Roy continued to read, and the others listened quietly as they ate. Aindra's khichdi was packed with ghee and was so spicy that Gopal felt as if he were swallowing fire. And to make matters worse, it came with a super spicy pickle. Placing the pickle on Gopal's plate, Aindra told him, "This is the same achar Krishna was holding in his hand when Brahma came to apologize for stealing all the cowherd boys." Somehow Gopal managed to get it down. Once Aindra had served everyone else, he made a plate for himself, sat down, and focused on honoring the prasadam. After a few minutes, he looked up and said, quote, "Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says that one who approaches Mahaprasadam with an enjoying spirit to satisfy his tongue and belly is an offender. Taking Mahaprasadam with an enjoying spirit results in taking another birth in the material world, because it's only in the material world that one approaches Mahaprasadam in an enjoying spirit." Aindra valued Mahaprasadam greatly and was adamant that it be fully honored and never thrown away. Quote, "If you bring even a few grains of this prasadam anywhere else, they will say, 'Oh, it's Vrindavan prasadam,' and honor it with great respect. But here we just throw it away in the dustbin," he said. "For this offense, one would have to be born as a monkey here in one's next life, to learn to treat prasadam respectfully." He had gotten very upset when he'd once found that 24-hour kirtan members had thrown Mahaprasadam onto the veranda ledge and left it for monkeys. He had retrieved it and eaten it himself. Quote, "This is a sacred Mahaprasadam from Govardhan and Shalagram Shilas, and they throw it away like that," he had said. "I'm never giving them any again." When he was finished, he swished his hands around in a cup of water and said, "Prabhus, I have to wake up by 2 a.m. to finish my quota of japa, so please excuse me." Then he drank the water and lay down to sleep with his head at Nitai Sachi Suta's feet and his feet near the stove. On the way out, Ram Roy told Gopal, quote, "For Kartik, he chants 64 rounds before sunrise." Gopal began spending more time with Aindra in his room and in kirtan. While watching Aindra dress Nitai Sachi Suta one day, he noticed that Nitai had only one earring. "Prabhu," he said, "you forgot one of Nitai's earrings." "Really?" Aindra asked. Then he turned to Nitai and politely inquired, "Nitai, do you want another earring?" After a moment he said, "Okay," and gave Nitai a second earring. Then he turned to Gopal and asked, "How did you know?" "Well, I just saw that he only had one." "Yeah, but maybe he only wants one," Aindra said. "Well, Mahaprabhu wears 2. "Yeah, but that's Mahaprabhu." In the 10th canto, Balaram is described as having one earring, Eka Kundala. The Harivamsa, Vishnu Purana, and Brihat Samhita all confirm it. Nitai is non-different from Balaram. Therefore, our acharyas clearly describe that Nitai. Just then, there was a loud clink from the altar. Nitai's second earring had fallen off. Aindra smiled from ear to ear. "You see," he said, "I told you." "Prabhu, why is there a tree in your room?" Gopal asked one day. "Well, not too long ago, a terrible thing happened," Aindra explained. "The tamal tree in the courtyard died, and they chopped it into pieces to get it out the door. They planted a new one, but the original is special because Srila Prabhupada himself saved it from being cut down while the temple was being built. I didn't want to be separated from that tree, so I found the biggest, most beautiful piece and took it up here. You must be knowing how the gopis mistake tamal trees for Krishna and embrace them." Notice the sawdust? Gopal asked. Termites are wrecking it. When he looked closer, Ayendra saw that Gopal was right, so he flushed out the termites and sealed the wood with a thick layer of lacquer to prevent further damage. Do you know why I selected this particular part of the tree out of all the pieces they had cut it into? He asked. No, why? Look at it, he encouraged. You can't see it? See what? Look how it has a threefold bending form, just like Krishna. The branches are just like Krishna's arms holding the flute to his lips. Gopal looked around the rest of the room, wondering what other hidden treasures he might find. What about the ceiling, he asked. Why did you paint a sky up there? Ayendra seemed embarrassed. Well, he explained, a real Goswami would live without a roof and sleep outside beneath the trees of Vrindavan. I really want to do that, to sleep under the tamal tree in the courtyard, but I'm too weak. But I thought I could at least emulate that mood in my room. Motioning toward the altar, he said, That's the temple room, and here we are standing in the courtyard with the tamal tree, out under the open sky. And what are all these sticks? Gopal asked, pointing to the branches propped here and there in corners or against walls. They're kalpavriksha. They can give Krishna Prema. He joked, they're my tree dundas, like the tree dunda staffs sannyasis carried, made of 3 rods, signifying service with mind, body, and words. He had picked them up at Sevakunj and worshipped them as representing different Sakhis who had been present during the Kunja's nocturnal Leelas. That painting is beautiful, Gopal said, indicating an old framed painting on the wall. But why is it so warped and wrinkled? It used to hang in the temple on the wall of the Tulsi Mandap. A few years ago they took it down and threw it away. I saw it sitting in the garbage and my heart just broke. You know, it's so awful to just throw away such a beautiful big painting of Radha and Krishna. I yelled at them about it and carried it up here to my room. It was beautiful, Gopal agreed. Radharani and Krishna were standing side by side, each with an arm around the other, Radharani holding Krishna's flute to his mouth while he covered her shoulder in his chadar. What do you like most about it? He asked. Look at Krishna's eyes, Ayendra pointed out. They have such depth of expression. I like to do my Nam Japa looking at this painting. Why don't we fix it up? Gopal suggested. Ayendra's face lit up, and the two of them began gathering bricks, buckets, and hammers, carried everything up to the roof, and after paying obeisances, laid the painting flat on the ground and flattened it out. Gopal joined the 24-hour kirtan party and stayed in the ashram through the winter. Knowing it would be too cold for him, he had brought an electric heater, but the outlet in the ashram didn't work, and anyway wasn't compatible with the pins on his heater's plug. Late one night, unable to tolerate the cold, he knocked on Ayendra's door. It was past 2, but Ayendra grabbed a few tools, ran over, repaired the outlet, and changed the pins on the heater's plug. There you go, he said with a smile, and returned to his room. Prabhu, Gopal appealed in the middle of another night, having again knocked on Ayendra's door and awakened him. I just had a really heavy ghost nightmare. Ayendra brought him inside, sprinkled him with shalagram water, and said, Don't worry, Uncle Ayendra will always be here for you. You can always come to me. Ayendra had always been handy, making things with his hands and working with musical instruments and equipment, employing what his bandmate had called his, quote, construction logic. To play just one part of one track of an album, he had taken a small panchtara, a 5-stringed instrument from Bengal, and fitted it with a handmade fretboard A long, tedious procedure requiring close attention to exact detail and measurements. When he was playing it in his room one day with the door open, Gopal heard him from outside. "Hey, Prabhu, what are you doing?" Gopal asked. "Just jamming out?" Ayendra started playing the melody of Jaya Radha Madhava, and Gopal picked up a dotar, like a Bengali banjo. Ayendra tuned it to the same key and plucked out a simple rhythm, and the two started jamming together. "We were having a great time," Gopal remembered, but then some brahmachari walked past and started saying something, criticizing, passing judgment, and that spoiled the mood. Ayendra shooed the devotee away and shut the door. "You see," he said, "I need to soundproof the room." He would get into his deep bhav in his room, Gopal described, playing harmonium and just crying out to his deities, and he didn't want to feel that someone outside might hear him. It would interfere with his expression. He needed to know that he could just express himself in his own space without anybody's negative vibration. Ayendra had also been disturbed by sounds coming from the outside. "I can't sleep," he told Gopal one morning. "Why not?" Gopal asked, concerned. He kept watch on Ayendra's health, knowing that his getting at least some rest was essential for his whole kirtan program. Ayendra was very sound sensitive, and trying to catch up with his sleep with a few hours after Bhagavatam class, he had been kept awake by noise from a classroom in the Gurukul below. As the boys had been moving around, their chairs had been scraping against the floor and screeching. Ram Roy had brought velvet pads from the U.S., and Ayendra tried attaching them to the bottom of the chair's legs, but that didn't work. Gopal went to speak with Ananda Brindavaneshwari Dasi, the Gurukul principal, and she acknowledged the problem, but didn't know what to do about it. It was driving her nuts too, she said. She didn't know how the teachers could teach with it. From Ayendra's perspective, the best solution was to do what he had suggested, soundproof the room. It would help him get rest, allow him to concentrate while chanting, reading, and writing, and keep out external noise when he was recording. First, he got special, unbreakable, triple-paned glass for the back window behind the deities. Then, researching online, he found a company in America that manufactured soundproofing equipment for studios and carried a rubber pad with foam that could be adhered to the door. He ordered it to be shipped to New York, and Prabhupada Das, who was coming to Vrindavan for VIHE courses, brought it with him. There was a full manual for installation. Ayendra had his toolbox and everything, Gopal remembered. He got the door off its hinges and laid it out on the walkway, and we were trying to figure out how to put it all together. The mat had this peel-off sticky part, but it wasn't sticking properly. It wasn't working, and Ayendra was getting kind of frustrated. After a while, he said, "Okay, I guess we'll just have to look at this again tomorrow." And for the next week, he had no door up, just the screen and a dhoti for privacy. Finally, Ayendra got a carpenter up to his room, found and brought up yet another door, nailed the screen door to that, and attached the American soundproofing to the inside. Then he went to Mathura, got another kind of rubber mat, and attached that to the outside. The whole process took a full week, but once everything was in place, he had a triple barrier: the American pad, the Indian mat, and 2 wooden doors, rounded at the edges, with the screen door attached, between him and the outside world. The insulation was airtight, and the soundproofing was perfect. There was only one problem. "What happens if something happens to you and we can't communicate with you or get in?" Gopal asked. "You're going to need a cell phone." "No cell phone." Ayendra was firm. They argued back and forth, but Ayendra wouldn't relent, so Gopal thought of installing a dog flap like what was used to let pets in and out of a house. Why do we need that? Aindra questioned. So that this dog can get in there sometime if you have a medical crisis or something. Aindra took the lower right panel off the outer door and had the carpenter cut a small trap door in it behind the screen, enough for ventilation and just big enough for a small person to slip through. When he cooked, he could leave the inner door open, prop open the trap with a stick, and allow for air to flow through the screen, but you couldn't tell from the outside. During his early years in Vrindavan, Aindra had been quite regulated in the hours he kept, taking rest by 10 or so at night and getting up at 2 or 3 in the morning. Until 1999, he made a point of attending Mangalartik every morning, chanting japa by the railing in front of Sri Sri Radhashamasundar's altar, and afterwards chanted while circumambulating the temple or in his room. For Bhagavatam class, he would stand on the side of the temple room behind the other listeners or lean on the railing, always softly chanting. As had been the case practically since he joined the movement, when he had a question or comment for the person giving class, he would begin with the preamble. On some occasions, he'd add a point or a clarification or explanation. On others, his questions were challenging, pointed at some error in the speaker's philosophical presentation, regardless of their stature or position, and he wouldn't let go of a point. As one devotee speaker recalled, he would either ask a very difficult question or, more often, simply give his own Bhagavatam class, picking up on what he wanted to say. Sometimes he would follow up with the speaker after class, approaching the Vyasasan for discussion. As years passed, his schedule became less fixed. He would listen to class from his room via the radio broadcast and go down only if he had a query or comment. When he did hear something he considered questionable, he would rush down to the temple room to confront the speaker. Quote, "If you were giving class and you saw him walking in," one devotee recalled with a laugh, "you'd think, uh-oh." As his preaching and rounds of japa increased, Aindra's chanting could continue through the day and into the night and early morning. Quote, "There was always something going on in which he was involved," Ram Roy remembered. Some project, decorating the ashram, or putting an album together, or later, working on his book. Sometimes he would wake up his deities and perform their puja during the day, but when he was engaged in something particularly demanding, he might not get to it until late at night. Everything was quieter then, too, and he was less likely to be disturbed. He'd try to move his deity worship earlier, but after a few days, things would inevitably slip back to where they had been. But even in these later years, he was still regulated in his chanting and deity worship. He just followed a different clock. Quote, "We're on a 24-hour kirtan schedule here," he told the kirtan devotees, "so just make sure your 16 rounds are completed." It was a shifting schedule. The specific timing might vary day to day, but the 24-hour requirement was fixed, and he would always finish his japa and puja within that time, after which the clock restarted. When Aindra made daytime appointments, he was frequently late, usually leaving his room at the arranged time to arrive, regardless of how long it might take to get to his destination. And at night, with all his projects, his tendency to lose track of time when preaching, and his extensive deity worship, he didn't eat or do anything else until very late. Invited for an 8 o'clock supper at a devotee friend's family home one night, he said, "I'll finish my puja and come soon," but didn't arrive until 2 a.m. He typically slept only 2 or 3 hours each night, from around 2 until Mangalartik. was only rarely able to catch a few hours during the day, and sometimes didn't get to sleep at all, and wouldn't sleep for a few days running, especially when he was scheduled to dress Shishi Radha Shamasundar. One time, running late for his pujari service, he raced onto the altar after shortening his ritual purification, mantras and some drops of water, instead just pouring the whole Achman cup of water over his head. He was strict about 24-hour kirtan members' attendance at the morning program, and before Mangalarti he would check the kirtan men's room to make sure everyone had gone down. "Wake up, Prabhus," he would call out, rubbing their heads to rouse them. "Krishna is waiting for you in the temple room. He wants to see you." Or, like an army drill sergeant, he would yell, get up, dress, dress, go, go, go." In the temple room, he would point at each devotee to count that they had all arrived, and if satisfied, raise his arms in triumph and silently call out, Hari Bol. One morning, Amal Harinam Das, the son of the American cook Apurva Das and his book distributor wife Kamalini Dasi, who had joined the party later in 2008 after having listened to Aindra's recordings all of his life, was still putting his tilak when Aindra walked by. Aindra knew he was in trouble. Quote, "When Aindra Prabhu was going to chastise you," he remembered with a smile, "he would move slowly, stalk you, like predator." "What are you doing?" Aindra asked. "Why aren't you taking this service seriously? When you go down there, do you see Krishna on the altar?" Amal had no reply. "That's the problem. You haven't come to the point where you see Krishna really there on the altar. You don't actually believe that he is present. Srimati Radharani doesn't accept the Bhoga offering if it's even 1 minute late. You have your service, your offering, at 4 o'clock. But if you are even 1 minute late, who is to say that Radharani will still accept your service?" Then he sat down in a serious mood. Quote, "He wasn't shouting or anything," Amal described. "He was just talking to me like a concerned parent." "Do you ever think that maybe Radha Shamasundar are down there waiting for you to sing for them?" Aindra continued. "Maybe right now Krishna is thinking, where is Amal? I can't wait for him to come and sing for me. Radharani has given you this service. How many people can say that they've had the opportunity to reside in Sri Vrindavan Dham? And of those, how many can say they've been given the opportunity to do kirtan for Radha Shamasundar, Krishna Balaram, and Gaur Nitai here in Krishna Balaram Mandir? You know, Amal, maybe some people are too dull-headed or spaced out to grasp what I'm saying, but I expect you to get this because you have great potential to be a leader in this society." Amal saluted, responded, "Yes, sir," and marched out, both enlivened and encouraged in his service. In his assessment of the kirtan members, Aindra valued their ability to adhere to the schedule as well as their musical expertise. One new devotee in the party wasn't much of a musician, but Aindra still valued and praised him because he was punctual. Quote, "I really appreciate him," Aindra told the other members. "He doesn't know how to play kartals nicely, he doesn't know how to sing nicely, and he doesn't play mridanga nicely, but he's on time for his kirtan every day." Even if a person wasn't very musically talented, one member remembered, if he had that sense of responsibility for the service, Aindra really appreciated that. At the same time, prospective members had to show some potential. There was a need for musical excellence, expertise, and Aindra didn't appreciate bad musicianship or unharmonious kirtan. Quote, "If this Harinam party came through my village," he said of one rough-sounding group in front of the temple, "I would throw rocks at them." Quote, "Srila Prabhupada expressed great pleasure with Achyutananda's mridanga playing," he remembered. At that time, Achyutananda was pretty expert compared to most of the rest of us. Prabhupada complimented him, telling him, "You were playing just like a professional." That wasn't a criticism trying to cut him down to size. "What the hell are you doing, trying to play like a professional?" He was complimenting him. Your playing is like a professional's. He was exhibiting a certain level of competence, and Prabhupada appreciated it. Not that professionalism supersedes the principle of purity, but there is need to understand the instrument you are playing. There is also a need to tune the instrument you are playing. I personally demand that devotees who are playing the mridangas understand that the first lesson in playing any instrument is how to tune it. Just like if you were going to play a guitar or a sitar, the first thing you have to do before you start playing it is you have to tune the instrument. Similarly, a mridanga needs to be tuned properly to have the proper vibration. And similarly, it is important to understand what it is to have a tuned pair of kartals. If one kartal is lower in pitch than the other, if they are not the same pitch, then it can create an awfully discordant vibration that breaks the ear, and rather than attracting people to the kirtan, it drives them away. When someone wanted to join, we would test them, Vrindavan remembered. Many people came to his room and asked if they could join the kirtan party, and Ayendra would tell me, "Bring your mridanga." He would give the person a set of kartals and tell him, "Okay, you play this beat," and he would have me play a series of beats on the mridanga, and we would see if the person could follow. He would test each one in that way. That was the basic musical prerequisite for joining, that at least he could play kartals, all the standard tals. He would test their singing too. Sing a note and see if the person could sing the same note, just to make sure they weren't tone deaf. Still, even if someone couldn't play them all, if Ayendra Prabhu felt the person had the ability to learn, he would give him a chance. He would say, "Okay, we'll try you out for a month. If you are improving, then you can stay. If you're not able to improve, then you should find another service." Usually there was a standard of being able to play kartals and mridanga at least enough to keep a kirtan going before you could move into the ashram, Amal remembered. But the main criterion Ayendra was interested in seeing the devotees have was enthusiasm to do Harinam Sankirtan sincerely and to sincerely learn to use the instruments in that service. Last, all the kirtan members had to know or learn English so they could communicate. Ayendra's standards for devotees leading kirtan always went back to the basics and to their ability not to lead but to follow. Quote, "If someone is not expert in following in a kirtan," he said, "he may pose as an expert leader, but he is actually not an expert leader. An expert leader is expert at both leading and following. It is not that he puts on a big show of being the kirtan leader, but when someone else is leading, he is either disinterested in or incapable of following others. Just like someone may be able to play the harmonium by the book, looking at the book and reading, but real expert means hearing. Everything begins with the ear. A real expert is able to accompany other leaders. When someone else is singing, he can follow the tune. That is actual expertise." Regardless of a devotee's musical expertise, however, to lead kirtan or even play mridanga in the temple, they had to chant at least 16 rounds of Nam Japa daily and follow the regulative principles. But Ayendra couldn't always keep track of all the members, and although he could generally maintain the party's standards, on occasion some of the boys strayed. During kirtan one evening, Gopal leaned toward Ayendra, indicated one of the mridanga players, who looked fully absorbed in the kirtan, unaware of anything else, and asked, "Are you really going to let this guy play with you?" "Of course," Ayendra replied. "Why not? He's great." "Look at him," Gopal said. "He's stoned." Ayendra looked more carefully. "Yeah," he said, "but he's a really good drummer." "But he's totally stoned," Gopal repeated. ripped and red-eyed. Handing the lead chanting to someone else, Aindra tapped the drummer on the shoulder, startled him out of his trance, and asked him to step outside. "Are you stoned again, kid?" he asked. The boy just nodded. "Come on," Aindra said. "I thought you cleaned yourself up." There was nothing he could say. "Well, you can't play here when you're stoned," Aindra told him. "Come back when you're clean." It was neither the first nor the last time that Aindra had to speak with a young kirtan member about their behavior. Some came from the West with loose habits. Others, having come from prominent Indian devotional families, felt entitled and flouted Aindra and the temple's rules and regulations. But he would not compromise the kirtan party standards. When he confronted one devotee about to lead the evening artik while intoxicated, Aindra was met with insults and even physical threats. But he held firm to the kirtan standards.